someone proposed to us, an artist, to do a bronze statue of Robin and permanently put it there.
Cool.
And the idea being that if you feel alone, or you can go sit next to him.
He made the world laugh until it cried, but what he revealed before he died left many speechless. Good Will Hunting gave Robin Williams more than just an Oscar. Behind one unforgettable performance was a quiet storm of emotion, pain, and truth. Years later, he would reflect on that role with a surprising honesty that hadn't been heard before. What really happened on set? What did he carry into that character? And what did he leave behind? The answers, when they finally came, weren't loud, but they were powerful. And one unexpected moment, caught on camera, changed everything. Sean Maguire in Good Will Hunting. Robin Williams's performance as Sean Maguire was not only pivotal in his career, but also personally transformative. While audiences saw a grieving therapist guiding a young genius through trauma, what they didn't see was how closely this character mirrored Robin's own life. Beneath Sean's calm exterior was the spirit of a man who had weathered decades of personal turmoil, addiction, loss, and emotional exhaustion. This wasn't simply acting for Williams, it was a role that allowed him to unearth buried truths and emotional weight. He wasn't just giving a performance, he was releasing something long held in. For a man so often tasked with making the world laugh, this role allowed him to be serious, still, and quietly powerful. Unlike many of his previous roles, which demanded speed and energy, Sean Maguire required stillness, presence, and reflection, qualities that Williams, in his private life, had long been searching for. He infused Sean with not only sorrow but wisdom, the kind of insight that can only come from real pain. Williams later said the film came at a time when he needed grounding, and Sean became that emotional anchor. The authenticity he brought to each scene wasn't fabricated. It came from lived experiences, from struggling through his own identity and mental health, and from learning how to live with loss rather than run from it. His perspective on life was nourished by his own personal struggles with substance abuse as well as his struggle for sobriety. The therapist was not without fault. He, too, was human and imperfect, just as was Robin. The choice to pull back, to allow silences to linger, to foster an emotional connection devoid of manic-style theatrics, was a conscious inversion of Williams's standard operating procedure. This sober realism spoke of a man with deep hurts, but who continued to show up for others anyway. Sean was not just about teaching Will. It was also about Williams's learning from himself that healing was possible even after a long time of emotional abandonment. Perhaps most profoundly, Sean Maguire gave Robin Williams a platform to be seen in a new light. Not as the manic comic genius, but rather as a layered and empathetic human. Williams went into some quiet emotional registers that had not really been apparent to the public before. One time, Williams said it was one of the very first times that he felt that someone had really seen him for who he was on the inside. So in many ways, through Sean, he was not only changing the course of his acting career, he was exposing the depths of a man who had kept behind the cover of humor for a long time. The performance became a deeply felt performance in modern cinema. But not everything on set followed the script. One moment, in particular, caught everyone off guard. Improvising greatness. The story of Sean Maguire's wife farting in her sleep might be one of the most quoted and beloved scenes in Good Will Hunting, but what makes it extraordinary is that it was never in the script. Robin Williams created the moment on the spot, drawing from his deep well of improvisational brilliance. Director Gus Van Sant allowed the camera to keep rolling, and what resulted was a scene that felt completely organic. Matt Damon's uncontrollable laughter, the shaking camera, and the genuine warmth in that exchange became iconic precisely because it was unrehearsed. This spontaneity not only lightened the emotional weight of the film, but it also transformed Sean from a character into a person we all felt we knew. More than a joke, the scene encapsulated Williams's signature use of humor as an emotional connector. By telling a silly yet deeply intimate story about Sean's late wife, Williams brought to the surface the love and humanity beneath the grief. It was a lesson in how humor can preserve memory, bridge vulnerability, and give dignity to the mundane. This wasn't just a therapist helping Will, this was a widower choosing to remember his wife in a way that honored her spirit. It added emotional texture that no scripted line could have matched. Even further, the spontaneity highlighted an issue that was common to both Sean's character and Robin's life: authenticity through humor. Williams had frequently said that his comedy was a defense mechanism and a healing instrument for him in the pain that he had suffered. This little comic story helped the audience see that the healing process does not necessarily occur through colorless solemnity, but often through laughter. Robin, in giving Sean that moment, was not running away, but actually stepping into the pain of it to share love through laughter, an approach he had known for a long time as a means to process the grief in his life. This has consequently been one of the most enduring film scenes, and it is enduring in both categories, humor and humanity. It took the wise mentor stereotype and reframed it in terms of showing that those who counsel others have stories, quite often, that are filled with their own share of sorrow and absurdity. To speak of testimony is to speak of the magic that Robin wields through unscripted moments. It defines the experience for viewers, equal parts humor and heart. For Robin Williams, this was one among the numerous occasions while shooting when the actual overtook the acted, resulting in cinema audio effects still affecting the audience many years later. A set full of emotion. Filming Good Will Hunting marked a deeply emotional period in Robin Williams' life, a time when he wasn't just portraying pain on screen, but living through it off-screen. Years of emotional exhaustion, grief, and addiction had taken their toll, and the role of Sean Maguire became a rare outlet for expression and introspection. Williams wasn't acting in the traditional sense. He was laying bare his internal battles. Those who observed him during production said there was a kind of reverence around his performance, a sense that something real and unspoken was unfolding beyond the lines of the script. Unlike roles that demanded quick wit and comic precision, Sean Maguire required Robin to slow down and sit with discomfort, something that didn't come easily to a man known for filling silence with laughter. This shift in performance style aligned with his personal efforts to move beyond coping mechanisms and toward healing. The stillness of the character, the intentional pacing, and the emotional depth were all reflections of someone trying to be present after years of retreating into performance. The emotional resonance of Sean wasn't just crafted, it was lived in, a product of someone who understood the cost of avoidance and the value of connection. Being in an environment with emotionally tense scenes echoed the seriousness with which Williams took the role. He not only said the lines, but really lived them. Scenes about grief or forgiveness and vulnerability would often find Robin and the entire crew affected. Co-stars and crew reported moments where the entire room would go quiet out of will, not polite obligation. Williams was fully there in those moments, drawing from deeply personal places that few performers would be so willing to go. Good Will Hunting was not just work for Robin, it was a form of reconciliation. In interviews following the film release, he often referred to the project as sacred, something that came at the perfect timing of his life. The film became an arena for reflecting, for feeling what needs to be felt and rediscovering. As Sean, Robin allowed himself to be vulnerable without a punchline and grounded without the burden of entertaining. It became an opportunity to be real, even in front of the audience, real for him. It was that emotional honesty that rendered the character immortal, and the man behind it unforgettable. Williams versus himself. Robin Williams's battle with addiction was not just a chapter in his life. It was a recurring thread that quietly shaped his identity and informed his most honest work. Long before he accepted the Oscar for Good Will Hunting, he had lived through the chaos that comes with fame and the temptations that shadow it. In the late 1970s and early 80s, he was a rising star with the world at his feet and hard substance within easy reach. But underneath the high-energy performances and relentless humor was a man who admitted he used substances not to feel more, but to feel less. He once described hard substance as a way to shut his mind down, a dangerous antidote to his own emotional overload. The wake-up call came in 1982 with the sudden death of his friend, John Belushi. Just hours before Belushi's fatal overdose, Williams had visited him. The loss devastated him and forced a moment of reckoning. At the same time, his wife was pregnant with their son, and Williams knew he didn't want to bring a child into a world where he was coked up and emotionally unstable. He got sober without the aid of rehab, a choice he later described as both empowering and dangerous. For nearly 2 decades, he stayed clean. But addiction, as he would later reflect, is patient, it waits. And in 2003, during a lonely visit to a remote Alaskan town while filming, he found it again. In a matter of days, before long, the relapse occurred in heavy drinking. At that time, he compared what it felt like to decide to drink to standing atop a building and convincing yourself you could fly. Unlike in the earlier days of addiction, Williams had matured and developed a self-awareness that allowed him to see the true scope of the problem. He voluntarily checked into rehab in California's wine country. In classic Robin fashion, he joked about the irony of going to a treatment center surrounded by vineyards. The sober truth was he could no longer do it alone. He admitted intelligence had been his enemy. He had believed he was intelligent enough to outthink addiction. He learned to surrender in rehab, something he had resisted for so long and now considered a requirement for living. That experience altered the way he acted in Good Will Hunting. It wasn't merely about one man assisting another in his recovery. It became a sort of self-reflection. Sean Maguire's quiet, suffered strength, his losses, and the requirement for him to mentor another reflected very much Robin's own search for meaning after years of private suffering. The Oscar win that followed then wasn't so much an accolade to his career as a recognition of that internal battle. Williams didn't wear his pain on his sleeve. He infused it into Sean with quiet, undeniable weight. He was not cured by the role, but he was changed by the role. For Robin Williams, the film marked a turning point, not only in his career, but also in his understanding of healing, that it is never linear, never complete, always worth fighting for. A scene too real. During the filming of Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams delivered a performance so emotionally raw that it frequently blurred the line between acting and lived experience. There were multiple moments on set where he became so overwhelmed with emotion that he couldn't finish a scene. One such instance occurred during the emotionally charged monologue where Sean tells Will, "It's not your fault." The moment was carefully crafted in the script, but what unfolded on set was far more powerful than anyone expected. As Williams repeated the line, something shifted, not just in Matt Damon's character, but in Robin himself. According to crew members, the emotional intensity became too much, and Williams broke down for real, visibly shaken as years of personal pain surfaced. These unscripted breakdowns weren't planned, but they weren't discarded either. Director Gus Van Sant and the editing team chose to keep elements of those real emotional moments in the final cut, adding an unmistakable depth to the film. One crew member later stated they had never seen anything like it. A performer so vulnerable, so utterly present, that the entire set fell silent. What the audience sees on screen isn't just a therapist connecting with a patient. It's a man bearing his soul, reliving loss, regret, and the lifelong weight of unspoken grief. Williams wasn't simply portraying Sean, he was Sean, and for a few unforgettable moments, the camera captured something entirely authentic. These reasons made the moments feel quite real for the viewers, as they were linked to Robin's private life. Experiences of addiction, dark times of depression, and an outstanding sense of empathy for human suffering all came together to create such scenes. Williams was quoted in interviews saying that acting could both heal and be emotionally dangerous. The more he truthfully performed, the more of himself he would have out on display. In that scene with Matt Damon, Robin was not playing to gain the drama, but was touching the reality of loss, thinking perhaps of late friend John Belushi, or of some of those fragile moments in his own life, when his worthy self wasn't as deserving as he felt of the compassion bestowed on him. These meltdowns added to the mythology of Good Will Hunting and the legend surrounding Williams's performance. This was not merely another Oscar-worthy role, it was a masterclass in emotional truth. With his breakdown on the screen, Williams allowed everyone in the film and the audience to feel. This is where fiction often falls short of reality, and here real vulnerability can take center stage. Perhaps Robin Williams found some small measure of catharsis in those tears he shed before the camera, but for the rest of us, they became some of the most unforgettable expressions of humanity caught on film. And while the emotions on screen were unforgettable, the bonds built behind the scenes told another story. The bond formed off-camera. While Robin Williams delivered a career-defining performance in Good Will Hunting, his presence off-camera was just as impactful, particularly for the film's young creators, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. At the time, both were up-and-coming actors who had poured their hearts into a script that no one initially believed in. Williams, already an established star, not only agreed to take on the role of Sean Maguire, but also used his influence to help get the film made. From the start, he treated Damon and Affleck as equals, showing genuine respect for their writing and passion. His support gave the project the credibility it needed and boosted the confidence of its young stars. Williams quickly became a quiet but profound mentor to the pair. He offered them advice not just on acting, but on how to navigate Hollywood while staying grounded. According to Damon, Robin emphasized the importance of staying true to your voice and not getting lost in the fame. On set, Williams would often stay behind after filming to talk with Damon and Affleck, sharing his own experiences with the industry, both the highs and the heartbreaks. He also spoke candidly about addiction, mental health, and the pressures that came with success, topics that Damon would later say deeply influenced how he viewed his own career and personal well-being. Embracing humanity in stories is arguably the most permanent lesson Robin taught. He motivated Damon and Affleck to write and act from their truth. This is a piece of advice that lasted long enough to be found in the kind of stories both will tell in their careers. Williams's mentorship was neither grandiose nor structured. It took place in a quiet exchange of honesty, a few words between takes, or an elbow nudge that whispered, "You're going down the right path. Just keep going at it." After finishing their work together, Williams, Damon, and Affleck became very close. Damon would later say that losing Williams in 2014 was very personal for him. It was not just what the film meant, but a great deal of it was what Robin had meant as a friend and as a guide. Williams saw very early on that they had something and chose not to dim his light. Thus, his legacy is not only recorded on celluloid with that unforgettable character in Good Will Hunting, but also in the lives he helped shape like a sage, softly affirming the next generation with compassion, humility, and the quiet wisdom of a man who has lived it. Depression and self-doubt on set. Even at the peak of his creative powers during Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams quietly struggled with deep self-doubt and the weight of depression, issues he kept carefully tucked behind his legendary smile. Those who worked closely with him on set often observed his habit of asking, "Was that good enough?" after scenes, even when his performances were extraordinary. For Williams, who was known for his improvisational genius and infectious energy, this persistent need for reassurance wasn't about ego. It was rooted in insecurity and a lifelong fear of not measuring up. Beneath the laughter and larger-than-life charisma was a man constantly questioning his own worth. Williams had long dealt with depression, something he spoke about more openly later in life. The emotional toll of his early fame, combined with battles against substance abuse and the loneliness that often accompanies mental health struggles, had left scars. Although Good Will Hunting offered him a role that let him express deeper parts of himself, it also made him confront emotional truths that were difficult to face. Playing a man who had lost his wife and found renewed purpose in guiding someone else mirrored Robin's own life, someone who had experienced profound grief and used humor and compassion to keep himself afloat. At times, on that very set, the actors would show the emotional tailspin between takes. Williams had this ability to turn any room into laughter with one quip. But those associated with the production noted that the actor found plenty of time to retreat into a quiet space where he contemplated the world. After the more challenging scenes, Sean would go quiet, retreating into thoughts after monologues on love, trauma, or sorrow. For those moments, it was not just an after-effect of acting. For a man who had had his share of pain, it was deep emotional processing. To dive into those levels of himself made his performance undeniably unforgettable. Good for art, yet not without cost. For the bright side of Robin Williams, the one that, at least deep inside, sometimes even wondered whether or not he'd done enough, there was rarely an audience. This inner battle offered undercurrents of the larger drama of Good Will Hunting, for it was not only a role, but a high-wire act performed every single day. His vulnerability, cloaked behind his comic genius, which made Sean Maguire a full and accessible person, was an intimate exploration of oneself, just as much as it was an external badge of success. In fact, his later life saw him never quite giving up on this constant clashing with questions around self-identity, but in this fresh time with the camera, ripping it into something entirely pure that would outlast him and extraordinarily human. The night he won the Oscar. When Robin Williams won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1998 for Good Will Hunting, it was a career milestone many believed was long overdue. Known for his comedic brilliance and larger-than-life energy, Williams had delivered a quiet, emotionally layered performance as Sean Maguire that stunned both audiences and critics. As he stepped onto the stage to accept the Oscar, he offered heartfelt gratitude and a few signature jokes. But what happened after he left the spotlight told a more complex story. According to those present backstage, Williams leaned over and quietly said, "This might be the beginning of the end." The words revealed a man who, even in victory, wrestled with doubt and the burden of expectations. This private moment reflected Robin's conflicted relationship with fame and recognition. Though he had received countless accolades throughout his career, he often felt uncomfortable with formal praise. In interviews, Williams expressed how accolades could feel hollow, especially when internal struggles went unaddressed. Fame, he noted, often amplified loneliness rather than cured it. Winning the Oscar validated his dramatic abilities, but it also triggered fears about where to go next and whether he could ever truly live up to the weight of the honor. It was a moment of personal triumph, tinged with emotional complexity. At each stage of his career, Williams discussed the pressure of being on, always entertaining, even if he did not feel entirely in the moment. The burden multiplied after the Oscar, whereby audiences began to expect him to take on serious and nuanced work while still bringing some of the rapid-fire humor that established his name to the fore. That night held for him a somewhat bitter memory, a long-awaited moment of validation intertwined with a deep inner groan that no award could ever touch the wounds that he bore. An honest reaction would be, "That wrestling, he had been wrestling with it." Williams was backstage, where he was not making a cry for help. It was an honest account of a man reconciling his public persona against his private pain. This has a quality that makes it extraordinary. It was a moment, not just physically but emotionally, looking behind the proverbial curtain. Even at the apex of his proverbial glory, Williams was a man who needed peace within. "I thought it was funny, because comedy is the way to survive," he said one time. "It could just keep that darkness from me." Yet it was this very state of vulnerability in which he lay that night, having received the grandest of professional accolades. The Oscar did not soothe his internal unrest. It only highlighted the fact that he was craving something deeper than applause. He wanted acceptance, clarity, and inner peace. A gift that helped him heal. Robin Williams often referred to Good Will Hunting as a gift. And for him, it wasn't just about the role or the Oscar. It was about what the experience gave him on a deeper, more personal level. At the time of filming, Williams had already been through decades of emotional turmoil, including addiction, grief, and internal conflict. The film offered him a rare chance to shift gears from high-energy comedic roles to something profoundly human. Playing Sean Maguire, a grieving therapist who helps a young man face his trauma, allowed Williams to process his own emotional wounds. It was therapeutic, even healing, a role that gave as much to him as he gave to it. The character of Sean represented something Williams had long sought in his own life: peace through connection. The scenes between Sean and Will weren't just dramatic exchanges. They were lessons in empathy, honesty, and vulnerability, things Williams himself had struggled with in real life. In interviews and public appearances after the film's release, he spoke about the emotional depth of the project and how it helped him reflect on his own relationships, particularly with his children and with himself. At a time when he was navigating the complexities of fame and relapse, Good Will Hunting grounded him in a way few roles had. The character of Sean held an odd validity because of Williams's dependence on an ailment, because he seemed to reevaluate his big life during his shoot, which in itself made more sense when he had to deal with bad relapse in Alaska, which showed how brittle recovery becomes. In that sense, it's a mirror to one's life. Williams, who knew the importance of forgiveness and healing and mentoring, lived out the wisdom available for Sean and did not leave it in the script. He was able to be still, quite honest, and emotionally vulnerable in that process of filming, which turned out to be a part of his own healing process. The earlier reference to the movie as gift was not just a sentimentalization, it indeed was thanking someone. In Sean Maguire, Robin Williams re-emerged, who had buried parts deep within many years of performance as well as pain. This actually gave him renewed purpose, not as an actor, but as a human being. For helping to make a story about redemption, trust, and emotional vulnerability, Williams got his own share of redemption. Yet, the most revealing truths came not during filming, but long after the cameras stopped rolling. His final message. In his final years, Robin Williams began to speak more openly about the pain he had lived with for decades: addiction, depression, and the relentless pressure to always be on. Though still deeply funny and sharp-witted, he dropped the mask more frequently in interviews, admitting that sobriety was a daily commitment, and that relapse had humbled him. He revealed that his time in rehab wasn't about punishment or shame, but about surrender, about acknowledging that he couldn't heal alone. These moments of candor offered a deeper insight into the man behind the comedy and, in retrospect, cast his performance in Good Will Hunting in a more profound light. Williams often returned to Good Will Hunting in these late interviews, describing the film not as a triumph of acting, but as a moment of spiritual alignment. He called the role of Sean Maguire a gift, not just because it earned him an Oscar, but because it allowed him to process his own grief and emotional complexity. When he described scenes like the "It's not your fault" exchange with Matt Damon, his tone shifted, reflective, almost reverent. He knew that the emotions captured on camera weren't just fictional, they were his. That film, he admitted, helped him tap into a well of honesty he rarely allowed himself to access elsewhere. In the last year of his life, Williams, battling a very secretive fight with Lewy body dementia, a diagnosis for which he was not alive to receive, showed increased eccentricities. Friends and family conjecturally add that he knew that something was wrong with him, but could never quite come to terms with it. Therefore, this hugely gives more emotional weight to these latter-day words, for he was sharing his narrative not only to correct the record about his past, but to attempt to reconcile with it psychically, in a time in his life when his mind and body had started to fail him. Robin Williams is, of course, leaving a legacy defined by humanitarianism and honesty, apart from a huge body of work. Within those years following Good Will Hunting, and especially in the days leading up to his death, he took to the stage to promote issues of mental health, just like many other things, humanizing life's essence. Sean Maguire is really more than a character. It marks the imprint of who Robin is beneath the laughter, beneath the hurting, healing, resilience. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this. And if you're ready for the next chapter, click the video on your screen now. You won't want to miss it.